Spirit Airlines died on May 2nd, 2026, telling its customers not to come to the airport. Every flight canceled. The yellow planes grounded for good. One of America's largest budget carriers just stopped existing. Thousands of jobs gone, millions of bookings worthless. Spirit isn't the first. Pan Am collapsed after 64 years. TWA disappeared after Carl Icahn stripped its assets. Thomas Cook's 178-year legacy ended in a single weekend. It won't be the last. Airlines collect billions of dollars in ticket revenue every single day, yet the industry has lost more money for investors than almost any other business in modern history. Hundreds of smaller carriers in between, gone without a trace. So how does an industry this enormous, this essential, this profitable looking on the surface, keep killing the companies inside it? That's the story. The brutal math behind why airlines fail, how the survivors actually make their money, and the financial lesson that applies to anything you'll ever build. Walk through any major airport, millions of passengers, ticket prices that make your eyes water. The illusion is overwhelming. These companies must be making fortunes. But revenue isn't profit. What flows in and what stays in are two very different numbers. In aviation, what stays in is almost nothing. A single transatlantic flight might generate $90,000 in ticket sales. By the time you subtract jet fuel, pilot and crew salaries, aircraft lease payments, maintenance, airport landing fees, gate fees, food, ground staff, insurance, fuel taxes, and debt service, the airline might keep a few $100s. Sometimes the flight loses money before the wheels lift off the runway. That's the surface problem. Underneath it sits the real one, fixed costs. A modern Boeing 787 costs around $250 million. An Airbus A350 isn't far behind. Airlines don't buy these planes outright. They finance them through lessors like AerCap and Air Lease Corporation, the same way you'd finance a house, except the payments are in the millions of dollars per month per plane, and they continue no matter what. Grounded planes, empty terminals, global pandemics. The bank always gets paid first. A typical large airline has 300 to 900 aircraft. Multiply the math. The fixed costs are catastrophic before a single ticket is booked. This creates the cost per available seat mile problem, or CASM, as industry analysts call it. Every empty seat on every flight drives that number higher, making the airline less competitive against carriers with better load factors. This is the trap. The business has to keep flying to survive, so it has to keep filling seats, which means cutting prices, which means margins disappear. And the moment any crisis hits, there's nothing left to absorb the shock. To see every single one of those forces in action, look at what just happened to Spirit Airlines. For years, Spirit was the loudest budget carrier in American skies. The yellow planes, the bare-bones fares, the ultra-low-cost model that promised cheap seats to anyone willing to pay extra for everything else. From 2020 to 2024, Spirit accumulated roughly $2.5 billion in losses. Every quarter after the pandemic was a quarter underwater. The lifeline was supposed to be a merger. In 2022, JetBlue agreed to buy Spirit for $3.8 billion. 2 years later, in January 2024, a federal judge in the District of Massachusetts sided with the Department of Justice and blocked the deal. The merger that would have saved Spirit was dead. Then it got worse. Pratt & Whitney, the manufacturer of Spirit's engines, discovered a defect that grounded dozens of jets for months at a time. By the second bankruptcy, Spirit had 38 aircraft sitting out of service on the ramp, each one still costing millions a month to lease. In November 2024, Spirit filed for Chapter 11. The first restructuring lasted just 114 days. Spirit emerged in March 2025, supposedly fixed. 5 months later, in August 2025, they filed again. Same court, same airline. A second bankruptcy before the ink had dried on the first. Restructuring lawyers call this Chapter 22, a second trip through Chapter 11. The track record on Chapter 22 is grim. Most carriers that file twice don't survive the second one. Spirit tried to negotiate a merger with Frontier Airlines. They walked away. They tried to secure a $500 million government rescue package. It was denied. The war in Iran sent fuel prices climbing again, adding hundreds of millions in costs the airline could no longer afford. On May 2nd, 2026, Spirit announced an immediate wind down. All flights canceled. Customers told not to come to the airport. One of America's largest budget carriers stopped existing in a single afternoon, leaving Frontier and Allegiant as the surviving ultra-low-cost carriers to divide the market. Spirit didn't die from one thing. It died from every single force this video is about to walk through. Fixed costs, fuel volatility, regulatory blocks, labor obligations, debt, hitting at the same time. Every airline that has ever existed has fought the same 5 battles. Spirit lost all 5 at once. Most airlines just lose 1 or 2 and limp along until the next one shows up. Start with fuel. Jet fuel is the most unpredictable expense in the business, often a full third of total operating costs. Prices shift constantly based on global politics, conflicts, weather, and supply shocks airlines cannot control. Tickets are sold months in advance, locking in revenue. If fuel spikes between the sale and the flight, a profitable booking can turn into a loss before the wheels lift off the runway. Airlines try to manage this with fuel hedging, locking in future prices through contracts. Southwest Airlines famously saved billions in the 2000s with aggressive fuel hedging while competitors bled money. It saves them when prices rise. It punishes them when prices fall, leaving them paying above market rates for fuel their competitors get cheap. Either way, fuel is a permanent gamble. Then there's labor. Pilots, mechanics, and flight crew aren't replaceable overnight. The training takes years and it's aircraft specific. Every pilot is certified to fly one type of aircraft at a time. Every mechanic is qualified on one type of engine. A Boeing 737 pilot cannot move to an Airbus A320 without months of retraining and a fresh certification. And that's just for the same role on a different plane. That gives airline unions a serious bargaining position, and they use it. Every few years, contracts get renegotiated for higher wages, better benefits, safer hours. If negotiations fail, workers strike. A pilot strike can shut down an entire airline within a day, costing millions per hour and destroying the brand. So airlines often sign expensive long-term contracts during good years, contracts that become unaffordable the moment the economy turns. Then, airports. Airports are monopolies. An airline cannot just land a plane anywhere near a major city. It has to use the specific airports that serve that city, and those airports charge for everything. Landing fees calculated by aircraft weight, gate fees for every minute at the terminal, fees for luggage systems, de-icing equipment, security, the right to be there at all, thousands of dollars per flight. If the airport raises fees to fund a new terminal, the airline pays. There's nowhere else to go, and it doesn't stop at the airport. Every country an aircraft flies over charges an overflight fee just for being in its sky, calculated by aircraft weight and distance flown, payable to that country's air traffic authority. The rates are set globally under ICAO Document 7100, but each country fills in its own number, so the cost varies enormously from one airspace to the next. In the United States alone, the FAA charges $61.75 for every 100 nautical miles over land and $26.51 per 100 nautical miles over ocean. A long-haul flight from London to Singapore can cross 5 to 10 different national airspaces, each with its own bill. When Russia closed its airspace to Western carriers after 2022, airlines were forced to reroute around the country entirely, adding hours of flight time, millions in extra fuel, and overflight fees to whichever country they detoured through instead. Then weather. A single major snowstorm or hurricane can disrupt thousands of flights across a continent. The airline loses the revenue on every canceled flight but still pays the crew, refunds the tickets, and in many regions covers hotels and meals for stranded passengers. When the system goes down, the damage runs into hundreds of millions in days, and untangling the operational mess of planes and crews stuck in the wrong cities can take a week. And finally, seasonal demand. Travel isn't even across the year. Summer, Thanksgiving, and Christmas pack the planes. January and February empty them. The fixed costs don't care. Airlines keep the same fleet, the same staff, the same lease obligations through every season, even when half the seats fly empty for 2 months straight. A great summer can be entirely erased by a quiet winter. That's the structural reality. 5 forces, no brakes, all of them firing at the same time. The only thing keeping most airlines alive between crises is one specific revenue stream, and we'll get to it. But first, the most famous airline that didn't make it out. Some airlines die, a few become a memory of an entire era. Pan American World Airways and Juan Trippe built the modern aviation industry. Founded in 1927 for most of the 20th century, it wasn't just an airline. It was the airline. The blue globe logo on the tail of every aircraft was a symbol of American glamour, the jet age, international travel itself. Pan Am invented transatlantic commercial aviation. It launched the Boeing 747. It flew presidents, popes, and movie stars. At its peak in 1970, it carried 11 million passengers across 86 countries. Then the world changed underneath it. The first hit came in 1973. The October War triggered an Arab oil embargo against the United States. Fuel prices exploded. Every airline suffered, but Pan Am, heavy on long-haul international routes that burned the most fuel, suffered most. The second hit came in 1978. The Airline Deregulation Act ended the era of government-set fares. Suddenly, airlines could compete on price for the first time in decades. Pan Am, built on prestige and full-service luxury, was structurally unable to compete with newer carriers running leaner operations. The third hit was self-inflicted. In 1980, Pan Am overpaid to acquire National Airlines. The merger was supposed to give it the domestic network it had always lacked. Instead, it loaded the balance sheet with debt the airline could never fully service. The fourth hit was the one that broke the brand. On December 21, 1988, Pan Am Flight 103 was destroyed by a terrorist bomb over Lockerbie, Scotland. 270 people died. Pan Am faced a $300 million lawsuit, FAA fines for 19 security violations, and an immediate collapse in passenger bookings. People simply stopped trusting the brand. The fifth hit was the Gulf War in 1990. Oil prices spiked again. International travel demand collapsed. By late 1991, Pan Am was losing $3 million a day. It filed for Chapter 11 in January 1991. It sold its transatlantic routes to Delta to raise cash. It tried to reinvent itself as a smaller carrier centered on Miami. None of it worked. On December 4th, 1991, Delta walked away from rescue financing. That same day, after 64 years in the skies, Pan Am ceased all operations. The final flight, a 727, landed in Miami from Bridgetown, Barbados. 7,500 employees lost their jobs in a single afternoon. Pan Am is the lesson that even greatness has limits. Sometimes the forces stack so high, fast enough, that no amount of restructuring can save the brand. Here's the strange part about the airline business. Most U.S. airlines that file for bankruptcy don't actually disappear. Delta has filed, American has filed, United has filed, Northwest, Continental, U.S. Airways. Every legacy carrier on the list has been through Chapter 11 at least once, and yet they all kept flying. Same logo, same crews, same planes, leaving the gate the next morning. The reason is the structure of U.S. bankruptcy law itself. Chapter 11 is not a death sentence, it's a legal pause. A federal judge steps in and freezes the airline's debts. While the case is open, creditors cannot demand payment, lessors cannot repossess aircraft, and lawsuits get put on hold. The airline keeps operating, flying passengers, collecting revenue, paying its current employees, while management restructures the business behind the scenes. What can it actually do during that pause? A lot. It can renegotiate aircraft leases at lower rates or hand the planes back to the lessor entirely. It can void labor contracts that were signed during better years and demand lower wages from unions. It can wipe out shareholder equity, sometimes to zero, and convert bondholder debt into new equity. It can shrink the network, close hubs, cancel orders for new planes. By the time the airline exits Chapter 11, it's the same brand on the outside, but a structurally different company on the inside, leaner, cheaper, with most of the old debt gone. This is why the same airline names keep returning to the skies after collapse. U.S. bankruptcy law, by design, allows large carriers to reorganize and continue operations rather than liquidate. But that protection is not unlimited, and it is not guaranteed. Foreign airlines often don't have the same options. Thomas Cook didn't, and it disappeared overnight. Some U.S. airlines emerge from Chapter 11 too weak to compete and end up filing a second time. Spirit's Chapter 22 ended in a wind-down rather than a recovery, and some carriers, like Pan Am, run out of rescuers willing to fund them through the process. Chapter 11 is a safety net, not a guarantee. It lets airlines fail without dying, until the day it doesn't. If Pan Am is the story of an airline killed by the world, TWA is the story of an airline killed from the inside. Trans World Airlines and Howard Hughes created aviation legends. Founded in 1930, for decades, it ran neck and neck with Pan Am as one of America's two great international carriers, coast to coast in the United States, then transatlantic, then global. Howard Hughes was its largest shareholder for years. The name carried weight. The damage began in 1985, when activist investor Carl Icahn took control of the company in a hostile takeover. Icahn was not an airline operator. He was a financial engineer. His specialty was buying companies, stripping out their valuable assets, loading them with debt, and walking away with the proceeds before the structural damage became visible. That is roughly what happened to TWA. Under Econ, TWA sold off its most valuable international routes, including its prized London Heathrow slots, to raise cash. The cash was used to fund a leveraged buyout that took the airline private and put hundreds of millions of dollars of new debt onto the balance sheet. By the time Econ left the chairmanship in 1993, the airline that had once rivaled Pan Am was a fraction of its former size, carrying a debt load it would never escape. TWA filed for bankruptcy in 1992, then again in 1995, then a third time in January 2001. The third bankruptcy was the end. American Airlines stepped in to acquire TWA's remaining assets, its planes, its St. Louis hub, its remaining routes, for $625 million in cash, plus the assumption of roughly $3.5 billion in TWA's lease obligations and other liabilities. On December 1st, 2001, the last TWA flight, a McDonnell Douglas MD-83, took off from Kansas City and landed in St. Louis. After 71 years, the TWA brand was gone. The cruel timing made it worse. The merger closed in April 2001. 5 months later, September 11th happened. American Airlines was suddenly carrying TWA's debt, TWA's planes, and TWA's employees through the worst aviation crisis in modern history. American itself filed for bankruptcy in 2011. And many analysts have traced the original wound back to the TWA acquisition that came at exactly the wrong moment. TWA is the cautionary tale of what happens when an airline is run as a financial vehicle instead of an airline. The math always wins. It just takes longer to show up than people expect. To understand how fast an old, trusted company can die, look at Thomas Cook. The company was founded in 1841 in Leicester, England. It started as a Baptist preacher organizing day trips to anti-alcohol rallies, then grew into something much bigger. By the 20th century, Thomas Cook was a household name across Europe, a travel agent, a tour operator, a hotel booker, a currency exchange, and eventually a full airline. At its peak, it moved 19 million passengers a year to 16 countries on a fleet of about 100 aircraft. The brand had survived 2 world wars, the jet age, the rise of the internet, and the budget airline revolution. 178 years of continuous operation, then a single weekend ended it. In the first half of 2019, Thomas Cook reported a loss of £1.5 billion. The company had been bleeding for years against online competitors like Booking and Expedia, which let travelers cut out the agent entirely. The debt load from a 2007 merger with another tour operator had never been cleaned up. Brexit uncertainty was killing UK booking volumes. The business model, physical high street travel agencies in an age when nobody walks into one, had simply expired. Through the summer of 2019, the company scrambled to secure £200 million in emergency funding. Its main shareholder, the Chinese conglomerate Fosun International, was prepared to lead a rescue. Then the airline's banks demanded an additional £200 million on top. Over the weekend of September 21st and 22nd, negotiations collapsed. Just after 2 a.m. London time on Monday, September 23, 2019, Thomas Cook filed for bankruptcy and ceased operations immediately. All flights canceled, all hotels unpaid, all bookings worthless. 21,000 employees lost their jobs overnight, and 600,000 customers were stranded around the world. The UK government launched Operation Matterhorn, the largest peacetime repatriation in British history since the Second World War. The Civil Aviation Authority chartered planes from as far away as Malaysia. Over the next 2 weeks, more than 140,000 British travelers were flown home on roughly 1,000 emergency flights. The cost to the British taxpayer ran into hundreds of millions of pounds. This is what makes the airline business different from almost any other industry. When a normal company goes bankrupt, its customers get inconvenienced. When an airline goes bankrupt, its customers wake up in foreign countries with no way home. 178 years of brand equity, tens of thousands of employees, hundreds of thousands of bookings, all of it gone in a single weekend. Not every airline failure is a tragedy. Some are just funny. In December 2002, the American restaurant chain Hooters, known for chicken wings, beer, and a very specific staffing philosophy, decided what it really needed was an airline. The chairman, Robert Brooks, acquired a Winston-Salem charter company called Pace Airlines. He started with 7 aircraft, 5 Boeing 737 and 2 757, painted them in Hooters orange and white, slapped the company mascot on the tail, and launched Hooters Air out of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina in March 2003. The pitch was simple: flat $129 fares, 17 destinations across the eastern United States, and on board every flight alongside the FAA-certified flight attendants doing the actual work. Two Hooters servers in the uniform from the restaurant, handing out merchandise and chatting with passengers. There was one technical problem. Under FAA rules, only certified flight attendants can serve food, push carts, or close aircraft doors, so the Hooters servers couldn't actually do any of the things flight attendants do. They were, in practical terms, in-flight entertainment. The airline launched with enormous press coverage. Flights were initially full. Brooks called it a flying billboard for the brand. He was not wrong about the marketing value. Every news outlet in America covered it. The financials were a different story. In 2005, Hurricanes Katrina and Rita sent fuel prices climbing. Hooters Air, with its tiny fleet and short routes, had no fuel hedging program to absorb the spike. Low-cost carriers like Southwest and JetBlue began undercutting its fares on every overlapping route. Load factors dropped to around 30%, meaning 7 out of every 10 seats on most flights flew empty. On January 9th, 2006, Hooters Air suspended scheduled service. On April 17th, 2006, the airline ceased operations entirely. The final flight went from Myrtle Beach to New York, New Jersey. Total losses to the Hooters brand, roughly $40 million, and the punchline. According to industry reports at the time, the airline's massive marketing investment, 3 years of flying billboards across the eastern United States, boosted restaurant sales by approximately 2%. Hooters Air is funny, but it's also the cleanest example of a deeper truth about aviation. The industry attracts ambitious money even when the business case is terrible. Flying is prestigious, owning an airline is glamorous, and the money keeps flowing in despite a century of losses. Warren Buffett summed it up in his February 2008 letter to Berkshire Hathaway shareholders, written just months after Hooters Air shut down. He called airlines the worst sort of business, one that grows fast, devours capital, and earns next to nothing in return. Then he added his most famous line on the subject: if a far-sighted capitalist had been standing at Kitty Hawk in 1903, the right move would have been to shoot the Wright brothers' plane down and save a century of investors from ruin. Which raises the obvious question: if airlines are this bad at making money, how are they still in the sky? So here's the answer to the question. The reason most major airlines are still in the sky has very little to do with flying anybody anywhere. It has to do with credit cards. Open the wallet of almost any frequent traveler in the United States, and you'll find one. The Delta SkyMiles American Express, the United Mileage Plus Chase Visa, the American A Advantage City MasterCard. These are co-branded credit cards, products built jointly by an airline and a major bank, where every dollar spent on the card earns the cardholder a small number of miles. Here is what most cardholders never realize. Those miles do not appear out of thin air. The bank pays the airline real cash for them, in bulk, by the billion. The airline then issues the miles to the cardholder as a digital reward. The cost to the airline of producing a frequent flyer mile, essentially zero. They are entries in a database. The airline gets paid hundreds of millions of dollars in advance, in cash, from major banks for digital points that cost almost nothing to create. This is why loyalty programs are the most profitable part of most airlines. The numbers are remarkable. According to On Point Loyalty's 2026 rankings, Delta's Sky Miles program is now valued at over $31 billion, making it the most valuable airline loyalty program in the world. American's A Advantage is worth more than $26 billion. United's Mileage Plus more than $25 billion. In several cases, the loyalty program is valued higher than the entire rest of the airline combined, meaning the planes, the routes, the pilots, the gates, everything you would normally think of as the airline is worth less than the database of points the airline gives away. During the pandemic, this is what kept the major U.S. carriers alive. When passenger revenue collapsed to nearly zero, the airlines went to the credit card banks and borrowed against their loyalty programs as collateral. American raised $10 billion this way. Delta raised $9 billion, at the time the largest debt deal in airline history. United raised $5 billion. The flying business was bankrupt for all practical purposes. The points business was still printing money. So the modern major airline is, financially speaking, two companies stitched together. A flying company that loses money in good years and bleeds it in bad ones, and a financial services company that sells points to banks at extraordinary margins. The flying company is what gets you to your vacation. The points company is what keeps the lights on. This is also why the airlines that died, Pan Am, TWA, Thomas Cook, Hooters Air, Spirit, could not survive. None of them had a loyalty program valuable enough to offset the structural losses of the flying business. Once the flights stopped paying, there was nothing else holding the company up. So pull all of this together. Airlines are not bad businesses because the people running them are stupid. They are difficult businesses because of structure. The fixed costs are catastrophic. The variable costs are unpredictable. The revenue is seasonal, weather dependent, and locked in months before the expenses hit. The competition is brutal. The customer is loyal to the price tag rather than the brand. And every shock, political, economic, viral, lands directly on the bottom line. And the survivors only survive because of the side business hidden in their wallets. There is a real money lesson here, and it has very little to do with planes. Revenue is not what makes a business durable. What makes a business durable is the gap between revenue and fixed costs, and the size of the cushion that gap creates when something goes wrong. Pan Am had high revenue and almost no cushion. Thomas Cook had 178 years of brand equity and almost no cushion. Spirit had millions of loyal passengers and almost no cushion. Every one of them died not because they couldn't sell, but because they couldn't absorb a shock when selling temporarily stopped. That logic applies to every business you'll ever build, invest in, or work for. Protect your cash. Watch your fixed obligations. Build the side income that keeps paying when the main income doesn't. Aviation is just the most dramatic version of a lesson that quietly governs every industry on Earth. That's the story. If it changed the way you see the airline business, hit subscribe so the next video lands in your feed. Like the video if it earned it. And tell me in the comments, which of these airlines did you actually fly on before they disappeared? I'm curious how many of the dead carriers in this video are part of someone's real travel memory. See you in the next one.